Genetically modified crops are controversial. The producers of GM seeds say altering the plant's genetics will generate heartier and more productive crops. But some farmers say with the decrease in their yields and loss of choice on what they can plant in their farms, it is the worst thing that has ever happened to them. Meanwhile, leading world scientists say much more research is needed to prove whether GM crops offer any benefit and not harm human health and the environment. For 18 years, GMOs have proliferated across the globe and it now represents 12% of the world's total crop area. In recent times, Nigerian government has welcomed some investors in the agribusiness, but some activists in the country would rather not see these investors here. The reasons: these investors deal in GM foods. So who benefits in the GM business? Our focus today on Earthfile. Welcome to the program. I am Ayola Kasim. Year 2013 was the 18th year of commercialization of GM foods. The year when growth continued after a remarkable 17 consecutive years of increases. Notably, 12 of the 17 years were double-digit growth rates. A record 175.2 million hectares of biotech crops were grown globally in 2013 at an annual growth rate of 3%, up 5 million from 170 million hectares in 2012. That is according to the International Service for the Acquisition of Agri-Biotech Applications.
Why is it that this figure is not higher? There is a simple reason, and that is that all the principal biotech crops in the major countries have already reached an optimum of between 90% and 100%. Let me give you some examples. If we take Canada, 96% of the key biotech crop, canola, is already biotech. Moving south to the US, we find that 90% of maize is already biotech. The same is true for cotton, and 93% of soybean is biotech. If we move to the developing countries, the biggest country in the south, Argentina, 100% adoption. You cannot do better. Brazil, in terms of soybean, at 88%. China at 90% in terms of BT cotton, and India at 95%. So this is a very important point, that we've already reached unprecedented high levels of adoption in major areas.
Despite this good news from the use of biotech in food production, there are voices against its application. Historians say in the 1970s and 1980s, institutional plant breeders and scientists widely assumed that traditional crop varieties maintained by peasant communities would rapidly disappear in the wake of the Green Revolution and the introduction of commercial varieties. But they were wrong. Today, despite a staggering level of corporate control over the world's commercial seed supply, the vast majority of the world's farmers, the peasant farmers who feed at least 70% of the world's population, are not tied to the corporate seed chain. Peasant and indigenous seed systems continue to be vital in meeting the needs of farming communities. Farmers are actively creating, improving, and exchanging their own varieties, including management, use, and domestication of wide crop relatives. Though the situation varies by crop and region, 80 to 90% of the seed planted by farmers in the global south comes from the so-called informal sector, that is, farm-saved seeds, including seed exchange with neighboring farms and seed sales from local markets or seed fairs. Just 10 to 20% of seed requirements in developing countries is met by the formal sector. The current industry line that GMOs increase production to feed the world contradicts the United Nations Science-Based International Assessment of Agricultural Knowledge, Science and Technology for Development, which says other mixed approaches to agriculture, not genetically modified monocultures, are needed to feed future generations. The vision for GMOs also contradicts the need for greater sustainability and reduced consumption of meat that has been called for in the latest climate change report of the IPCC.
The issue of organic agriculture sometimes polarizes the world. You know, there are those who say it is the way forward, and others say, look, don't be stupid, it's a luxury for the rich in the developed countries. You could not possibly feed the world through organic agriculture. But then, you know, this is one of the issues that for example, UNEP likes to challenge some of these mythologies. We did a survey of many thousand small-scale farmers in Africa who had switched from intensive agriculture to organic or near organic. They had seen their yields go up on average 100%, in parts of East Africa on average 125%.
In 2008, over 400 scientists, 30 governments from developed and developing countries, and 30 civil society organizations concluded work under the International Assessment of Agricultural Science and Technology for Development. The report observed that modern biotechnology would have very limited contribution to the feeding of the world in the foreseeable future. Among the 22 findings of the report that called for a new direction for agriculture are the conclusion that industrial large-scale agriculture is unsustainable because such farming is dependent on cheap oil and causes negative impacts on ecosystems. The report also warned against the expansion of biofuels, saying turning food crops into fuels could exacerbate food shortages. It recommends small-scale farming and agroecological methods as the way forward if the current food crisis is to be solved and to meet the needs of local communities, declaring that indigenous and local knowledge play as important a role as formal science. The United States, Canada, and Australia were the only governments in attendance not to sign. Despite being among the stakeholders who selected the report's authors, they accuse the assessment of being unbalanced and are attacking the authors' independence.
Once those patents come into your country, everything changes.
Meanwhile, in the United States, a growing number of farmers have been said to have reported health problems with farm animals fed genetically modified feed, and saying that animal health improves when feed is switched to non-GMO.
Now, once you let the horse out of the barn, you can't get it back in. If a company is going to promote these products in your country, I'd be concerned about letting that in. Just understand that the people that are pushing a certain agenda, they might not have your best interests at heart.
That wide margin is what actually impoverishes the farmer.
Environmental activists here in Nigeria are urging the federal government to put in place mechanisms to monitor commercial importation of seeds to ensure that they are not contaminated by GMOs, even as they underlined the need for Nigeria to have a strict biosafety law that adequately protects the nation's food, health, and environment.
The Minister of Agriculture claims that we're going to use only hybrid seeds. And then hybrid seeds are formed from a different type of genetic modification, which is a marker-assisted. But even with that, if, for instance, you take out the characteristic that allows the tomato to get rotten, it has been shown that this tomato now that does not depreciate or does not get rotten in the normal time that we expect it to, when you eat it, it has a problem. It affects your digestibility of that food, which means that these toxins now stay in the body and they cannot be exterminated. They cannot be gotten rid of via feces or urine. So these toxins stay in the body, and these are things that then lead to diseases and the huge amounts of cancers that we've seen in the world these days. Several studies and several tests have been done by scientists showing the negative impact that these foods have on livestock, have on the human body, and things like sterility, things like cancers and all of that. So it's a very dangerous thing to play with, especially in a country that is so blessed with fertile land.
According to the Vice President of the International Raw Crops and Vegetables, over 40 new hybrid seeds will be introduced to farmers in Nigeria. These seeds, he said, will help farmers increase their yields and improve their productivity. One of the world's largest seeds companies, Monsanto, had persuaded Nigerians about the benefits of biotechnology and genetically modified organisms in food production and its safety for human consumption, as other countries were accepting the technology.
We're a company that doesn't come in and just try and compete with what's already in the market and try and divide it up into smaller pieces. We're a company that brings new technologies, helps farmers increase the overall yield or a pile of grain that they produce, and that grows the economic pie.